Okay, here we are. Tuesday night for the Monday night shir. Parshas Yisroi. We have, it's not a very long parsha, but it is packed, action-packed. And the star of the show, the highlight of the week, must be the Aseres HaDibros. The Rambam famously writes, the Aseres HaDibros are the Yesoid for the entire Torah. And that's the reason why in the Beis HaMikdash, at some point they said it every day. And we had a whole shir about that. If you can stand up for the Aseres HaDibros when it's being laid. Are they more choshev than other psukim? Are they not? But the Rambam says that they are the yesoid of the entire Torah. Reb Tzadok Hakohen, and Rashi quotes this in the end of Parshas Mishpatim, writes that all 613 mitzvahs are somehow, they find their roots in the Aseres HaDibros. Which, by the way, some of the Rishonim say that when the king writes for himself a second Sefer Torah and he carries it in his hand all the time, some Rishonim believe it was a Aseres HaDibros card. It wasn't a real Sefer Torah, it was Aseres HaDibros. But being Reb Tzadok Hakohen writes that the 630 mitzvahs are all rooted in the 10 Aseres HaDibros, so it's as if he had the entire Torah with him. So the Aseres HaDibros culminates with the Isser of loy Sachmod, of not coveting, not desiring, and being jealous and envious. It's the real translation is coveting. And there are those that write there's a big difference between jealousy versus chemda. And maybe that'll be clarified through our discussion. Our discussion will be a mix of a drush philosophy element and a mix of halacha as well. Should be an interesting journey. Let's begin. So number 1, we have a pasuk in the end of this week's Aseres HaDibros. Number 10. Loy Sachmod beis reyecha. Loy Sachmod eishes reyecha. Don't covet the house of your friend. Don't covet the wife of your friend. Va'avdoi va'amosoi, his servant, his maidservant, his shur, his chamer, v'choil asher l'reyecha. And everything that he has. This is the 10th of the Aseres HaDibros. We've mentioned in the past that the Aseres HaDibros being translated as the 10 Commandments is a very loose translation. Who said there are 10 Commandments? There's a big machlokes if Anochi is one of the 10. Right? The Bahag does not count it, the Rambam does. And by Shabbos, there's the loy sasa of not doing malacha, and then there's the mitzvah of zocher. It's 2 different mitzvahs of the Taryag. And so too, not serving idols, not owning idols. In lo yilecha, there's a few mitzvahs. And so too, by loy Sachmod, the Ibn Ezra actually writes, he sees 2 mitzvahs within loy Sachmod. Why did it say twice loy Sachmod? One by the bias and one by the wife. By the way, my voice is very weak, so we'll be ending. We're going to go a little shorter today. Okay. Last time I said shorter, and it was minutely shorter than usual. Hopefully today there'll be a bit of a reprieve. But the Ibn Ezra says twice loy Sachmod. He says this could be counted as 2. Loy Sachmod itself could be counted as 2 because it says it twice. In number 2, you have the Aseres HaDibros in Parshas V'eschanon. And there it says, V'loy Sachmod eishes reyecha. Don't be chomed the wife of your friend. So the order here is changed. First it says your wife, the wife of your friend. And then instead of saying loy Sachmod again, it says V'loy sisava, do not desire. Do not desire beis reyecha. Here it says Sodeu, his field, his evet, his amma, his shur, chamer, v'chorel asher l'reyecha. So off the bat, there's quite a few differences. Both times the Eibusha gives 2 prohibitions. In this week's parsha, both of them are loy Sachmod. In V'eschanon, it's loy Sachmod and loy sisava. Are they different or are they the same? Huge debate, we'll see. The Rambam versus the Smag, we'll see. Don't worry, it's on the paper. We'll see a big debate if loy sisava is the same as loy Sachmod. But it's interesting, the order's changed. In this week's parsha, first the Eibusha spoke about the house, and then the wife. And then in Parshas V'eschanon, It's changed. What happened? The Yidden, the morals of the Yidden changed in between the first Aseres HaDibros and the second. Bechlal, the Aseres HaDibros of Eschanon, in the simple reading of the Psukim, Moshe Rabbeinu is just recounting to the Yidden before they enter Israel what we heard on Vav or Zayin Sivim when we stood by the foot of Har Sinai. But there are Medrashim and there's a Gemara and there are those that say that no, the second Aseres HaDibros of Eschanon actually reflect the second Luchas Hashem gave Moshe. And there were changes in the Luchas itself. So the second Luchas were given, right, 80 days after we worship the Egel. So maybe after we worship the Egel, the Taiva for Eishus Re'echa now is more severe than the Taiva for your friend's property, right? As the famous therapist said, right, in Vienna, that all of a person's motives can be rooted in the lust that one has. That could be a result of the Egel Azov. So Dafka in the second Aseres HaDibros, the orders changed. If you notice in number 2, in Veschanim, there's a mention of Sodeo, the field. The field. It's not there in Yisrael. What's that about? The Reishis Chochma explains, he gives a beautiful explanation. By the first Aseres HaDibros, the Yidden were so holy and pure, we were going to go to Israel, there was not going to be any exile. If there's no exile, then there's always going to be Yovel. If there's always going to be Yovel, then a person's field always reverts back to them by Yovel. When they sell it at whatever year, you're really just renting the field until Yovel when it goes back to the owner. So coveting someone's field is really like coveting any item of the person. It doesn't have to be singled out. But in Veschanim it gets singled out, says the Reishis Chochma. Because by then, Golus is already on the cards. And when the Yidden are dispersed, there's no Yovel. And then when someone sells a field, it's forever. So you could take somebody's field forever. And that's why Sodeo gets singled out. So there are Mefarshim discussing the details of why the differences between these two psukim. But nonetheless, it's serious business. It's part of the Aseres HaDibros. It's the culmination, it's number 10. And one of the oldest questions in the book is, how could the Eibishter tell me, don't be jealous, don't covet? But what if I do? What if I do? I do. I am envious. I have a chemda. I desire what somebody else has. I like their clothes. I like their house. I like their car, their yacht. I wish I could have that yacht. Like, how is somebody? So God says, don't do that. But am I in control of my feelings? Right, like the Abarbanel asks about how could there be a mitzvah to believe in Hashem? How could they be to instruct to believe in something? You tell, what if I don't believe? You can instruct me to say something, to do something. So v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha may not literally be to love. It may be like Hillel said, don't do to somebody else what you don't want to have done to yourself. So it's an action. You can command on that. But how could they be to command on loving Hashem?
I love 7-layer cake.
Right. Avas Hashem, how could they be to command on Avas Hashem? How could every neshama have a shvuah, be taken by it? Right? Beles Breira, we're coerced into this oath, Tihi Tzaddik. And the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya that really to be a true tzaddik could be out of your reach. There's a mitzvah to have children. Pru Revu. The Rambam has an interesting lashon when it comes to having children. The Rambam says, how many kids do you need in order that the mitzvah should be fulfilled through you? As in, the action you can try as much as you want. What will happen? Will you have a boy? Will you have a girl? The Eibishter knows. And will they survive? They have to survive. And the children of their own, like, who knows? It's not really in my ability. I can't guarantee it. And the Rambam's law is, how many children do you need in order for the mitzvah to be fulfilled through you? As if it'll, the result is kind of out of your control. By the way, Reb Moshe Feinstein, we wanted to share this years ago, in his Igros Moshe has a take, the mitzvah of Pru Revu is not to have a boy and a girl. The mitzvah is to do the action of procreating and continuously do it. Once you have a boy and a girl, you don't have to continue doing it. It's just the sheer. Once you've reached that point, no longer do you have to continue trying to procreate. But the mitzvah is actually the act of procreating. That's in your domain. That's in your capability. That's the action the Eibishter asks from you. Once there's a boy and a girl, you've already reached the amount. You no longer have to continue doing the mitzvah. And with that, he answers many questions. Either way. So when it comes to Avas Hashem, we have, what the Alter Rebbe writes from the Magid, that the mitzvah actually is not to love Hashem. It's to do whatever you can. It's to contemplate the greatness of the Eibishter, in the Reimus Hakel, the wonder of God. And through that, Shema Yisrael, if you hear the Eibishter is Echad, if you contemplate the unity of Hashem, that will lead to V'haftas Hashem Alekecha. Or the fact we say, Haboicher Ba'am Yisrael Ba'ava, God chooses us with love, and you go straight to Shema and V'hafta. If you think of the love Hashem has for you, Haboicher Ba'am Yisrael, He chooses us with love, then Kamayim Aponim is reflected in our hearts. And we have a love to the Eibishter. So there are techniques, there are paths to go down to try and ensure that love. And that, the Alter Rebbe says from the Magid, is the mitzvah. If you actually don't get the love in the end of the day, you still did the mitzvah. Because the mitzvah is only what you have in your ability. When it comes to the oath of being a tzaddik, it's a little more complex. There's a Rabbi Morgenstein who is a big leader in Jewry today, not a Lubavitcher Chassid, but Kochs and Chabad Chassidus. Yeah. And he pushes that the Alter Rebbe never meant it's out of our grip to be a tzaddik. He says he doesn't know where this was born in Lubavitcher ideology. He says Lubavitchers have gotten it all wrong. They've all misunderstood Tanya, is what he says. The Alter Rebbe never meant that being a tzaddik is out of your grasp. Which is a pella, because it's very clear in Tanya that is the case. I don't know exactly what he's referring to. It is, the Alter Rebbe writes very clear that to be a tzaddik is taka out of your reach, probably. But the shvuah is to do what you can to get there. By the way, there is a tradition amongst Chassidim that the tzaddik that the Alter Rebbe discusses in Tanya is the tzaddik that's relative to a Beinoni. The true tzaddik is a whole different level completely. And for that, the Alter Rebbe wrote a Sefer Shel Tzaddikim, a whole different work. Anyhow, so when it comes to Chemda, the question arises, how could the Eibishter say, don't covet, what if I do? So if you look at number 3, there's a well-known Ibn Ezra on this week's parsha. Says the Ibn Ezra, Loisai, number 3, Anoshim Rabim Yitmul, many wonder on this mitzvah. How could How could a person not covet something nice in his heart? If it's truly desirable to your eyes. If you see something and it's attractive, how could you not covet it? How could you not desire it? She says, many people ask the question. Many people are bothered. How could they instruct loy Sachmod? It's not fair. He gives us a Yetzer Hara full of taivas and says, and don't desire. So don't give me a Yetzer Hara. Va'ati says, etim l'chamasha. So the Ibn Ezra gives what has become one of his famous mishalim. You should know there was a ish kafri, there was a villager. Sheyesh loy das nechayin, his head screwed on straight. He sees a princess, a beautiful princess. Lo yachmed oisa beliba, he won't desire her in his heart to be intimate with her. Meaning he won't truly fantasize about it, or he won't truly desire it, because he knows it's completely out of his reach. Ki yeda kizel lo yitachin, he knows it's completely, it's otherworldly, it's impossible. It's an impossible. Why let your thoughts even go there? Now he says we're talking about someone who's a das nechayna. Of course, someone who's a tipish could fantasize anything. But somebody who's normal only really dreams and fantasizes of things that they hope to one day get. Va'al tachshav, and don't think that this guy's nuts. Sheyisava, that he has a desire to have wings to fly to heaven. You ever fantasize to be able to fly? A kid fantasizes, he hears about a superhero. Oh, I wish I was that superhero. Once somebody matures, they no longer, or not usually, you don't expect a mature person to be fantasizing, right, to be a superhero flying through the clouds. Because lo yitachli is impossible. Just like a person has no taiva to be intimate with his mother, even if she's beautiful. And he says, why? Ki higilu minu urav, because from your youth, you've become accustomed to the fact that she's also to you, and there's nothing, it's not even, you can't, it's an impossibility. It's so foreign to you, your thoughts don't even go there. And you don't fantasize about flying to the heavens, and so too this villager, when he sees the beautiful princess, he sees her, but the idea of them being together is so far, it's so off the charts, he doesn't even let his thoughts go there. So Kacha, says Ibn Ezra, that's how the Eibishter wants every person to look at his friend's wife. That it's so distant, it's so foreign, there's such an impossibility. There's no shaychus or kesher with the two of us that your thoughts don't even go there. Kacha kol maskul tzarich sheyed, you gotta know that a ish, someone has a nice wife, or mammon, there's a lot of geld. A person doesn't reach his wealth because of his wisdom. Rak, whatever God allots to him. That says in Kehelis. And Chacham saying Moed Katan, Rav says, Boni, having children, Chai, Gesund, Mezoini, Parnasa does not depend on schus, it depends on mazel. Right? And the Ibn Ezra, more than anybody else, runs with that, as we discussed last week. He was an astrologer. But the idea is bringing over here is that God, he's talking about the fate that God decides. The Ibn Ezra is an astrologer. He believes that the patterns in the stars have meaning. But the Eibishter is the one that guides those stars, and he creates that meaning. So if somebody has a possession that God gave him, so God shows he should have that, and I shouldn't. So it's completely out of my realm. My thoughts don't even go there. The true maskil, the true intellectual, will not covet and not desire. And he says, if you know that the wife of your friend, God said you can't be with her, right? The Eibishter said no. That no is so resounding. Yoiser hin is gava be'einav. She's more removed from his eyes, more than the marshal of the princess and the villager. Because there it's just technicality. He's a villager and she's royal blood. Here the Eibishter, God in heaven, said she's not yours. She's not yours. Al kain, therefore yismach, but you'll be happy with what you have. And you won't turn your eyes or your heart. V'lo yosim el liboy. You won't allow your heart to be chaymed and to desire something which isn't yours. Because you understand that the Eibishter gave it to somebody else, not to you. You stay in your lane. And you can't take it with koichum. And you realize, by the way, that if the Eibishter doesn't want you to have it, then all of your planning and your cunning ways and works of how you'll get hold of it ain't going to work. If the Eibishter doesn't want you to have it, you're not going to have it. Al kain, therefore, you'll be boitech, and the Eibishter will take care of you, and the Eibishter will do as he sees fit. It's a wondrous Ibn Ezra, beautiful Ibn Ezra. Rabbi Chassidish Ibn Ezra. You're probably wondering, what was the Ibn Ezra's question in the first place? When it comes to loy Sachmod, the Rambam paskins, Tosfos paskins, the Ra'avad paskins, all the Rishonim paskin, based on a mechilta, the mechilta in this week's parsha, that you only violate loy Sachmod if you actually get hold of the item. You only violate loy Sachmod if you actually take hold of the person's item. We'll see more details about this soon. But so the Ibn Ezra Shai was, how could God dictate what to feel in your heart? The truth is, by loy Sachmod, you only violate if you actually get the person's item, as we'll see soon. So if you have the flaming fire in your heart, you still won't be over loy Sachmod. So the Ibn Ezra's question obviously is just following the pshat of the pasuk, the Eibishter, which simply means the Eibishter answered the feeling of the heart, and therefore he asks, how could God demand that? And he gives his mashal, which means this whole explanation is only in the study of Pshutei Shel Mikra. It's not true in the world of halacha. In the world of halacha, the question doesn't begin. You're only over if you actually go and act upon your chemda and you get your hands on that item, which is another case of the Ibn Ezra teaching the psukim against from the halacha, the traditions of Chazal. Here it's a chumrah. He's being machmir that even in your heart you could be over loy Sachmod. It's not though the Ibn Ezra does it time and time again. Things that are well known in Chazal, and he'll just... So often it happens in Pshat. Take the story of the Akedah, for example, right? In Medrash Rabbah, there's two opinions of how old Yitzchak was by the Akedah. If he was 26 or 37, and that would lead to Rivka being either 14 or 3 by the marriage with Yitzchak. And the Ibn Ezra says it can't be. Because if Yitzchak was that old, that means he willingly went along with Akedah because he could have resisted and fought with his father. It means he willingly went along, and yet the Torah doesn't praise him for that, right? Yitzchak gets where we had a shir on Friday, on Shabbos about by the Akedah, all about this. Who's the real hero by the Akedah? Right? Rabbeinu Bechaya brings that. There's a big debate. Some said Yitzchak, some said Avram. But the Ibn Ezra says the Psukim don't praise Yitzchak at all. It's mashma, he didn't have a choice. So he must have been a kid. And that's what he says. So, a story which every kid learns, Yitzchak was 37 or 26, it's Medrash Rabbah material, and the Ibn Ezra just, al pi savara, is doiche. Right, Reb Nachman of Breslov said, he puts the Rambam, the Moreh Nevuchim, the Ibn Ezra, and the Ralbag, he puts them all in the same pail, and chucks them all out of the base medrash. Like Reb Shem Tov, Ibn Shem Tov, the Sefer HaEmunos, puts them all on the same chair and respectively removes them all from the base medrash. Reb Nachman of Breslov said, right, you hear a pshat of the Ralbag, you have to tear kriya. He says, if somebody learns Moreh Nevuchim, I can tell, he said, because the Tselem Elikim is removed from their face. And he said Ibn Ezra is also to learn Ibn Ezra, because time and time again he teaches not according to Chazal. So this is one of those cases, but here is being machmir. You can't even be lo Sachmod belev. And it's a beautiful explanation that he gives. And the truth is, he's not the only one. Look in number 4. In number 4, the Sefarno, loy Sachmod. Look what he writes in number 4. Yadover etzlecha lenimna gomer. The item your friend has should be a complete impossibility to you. Nimna gomer, complete impossibility. Ki animna, because if it's completely out of your reach, lo yechamdeu ateva klal, your nature won't desire it. So he has the whole vart of the Ibn Ezra in that one line. The Eibush is expecting from you that your friend's property, possessions, should be so removed from you, so distant from you, as so, out of bounds for you, that you don't desire it. And then he said, B'chlal, what's the issue with chemda? Because chemda tigrei mes hagezel, chemda causes theft. Like it says by Achan that he desired them and therefore he took them. Which is an idea discussed, the Rambam as well, that chemda is almost like a safeguard to theft. If you covet something, the next step is you'll go and steal it. The Rishonim will want to know why in the Aseres HaDibros there's no Gneva, there's no Gzela. It says Lo Signa, but how does Rashi tie it? It's talking about Gnevas Nefashos, kidnapping, something that carries a death penalty. But, so stealing money, Gneva, Gzela, all of these things, holding on to someone's guilt, all of these cases are not in the Aseres HaDibros, only Chemda. Like, how do you explain that? So if loy Sachmod is a safeguard to all of these monetary asurim, it's very well understood. The Eibush is saying, I'm going to asher chemda, and then you won't come to Gneva and Gzeil and all these other monetary issues. Because all of them are a result of coveting. And if you correct the chemda in the heart, so then you'll abstain from all of those prohibitions. What? What? Well, no. Well, you can remove it. That's what the Bnei Sfarna are saying. That if you set your psyche right, you can remove the chemda from your heart. That's what they're saying. Fine. Concerning this marshal of the Ibn Ezra, join me number 7. This is from the Reishis Chochma. The Reishis Chochma in Shar Ha'ava. Okay? Rebbe Yodi Vidas. Contemporary of the Arizal in Sfas, also a student of the Ramak. The Chisei quotes a famous story. V'chei numad mimaise echad the Rabbi Yitzchak de Min Aku zal. Yitzchak de Min Aku was one of the greatest Kabbalists in times of the Rishonim. He was a student of the Ramban. The Ramban, the end of his life, makes his way to Eretz Yisrael, to Tzfas, for a couple of years, till he passes away. And Yitzchak de Min Aku was in Aku. That's where the Ramban, I'm sorry that I say Tzfas, I'm sorry, the Ramban was in Aku. And that's where Rabbi Yitzchak de Min Aku studied by him. And the Chidor writes in the Semak that Rabbi Yitzchak of Aku was one of the greatest in the Chochmas Hatziruf, of putting together the Oisius, the letters of the Eibishter's name, Sefer Yetzirah Chochma, which is interesting because the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim writes, he ermacht up from the whole Chochmas Hatziruf for putting together Oisius and Shemus of Hashem, he belittles it. And yet we have the Baal Shem Tov saying that Rambam was a Gross and Makubal, right? So that needs explanation. But Al Kaponim, Yitzchak de Min Aku, the Chidah says, was the king. Malachim would come to him, reveal to him secrets in this area, Chochmas Hatziruf, in the putting together Oisius, making names of Malachim, names of God, etc. And Rabbi Yitzchak de Min Aku is famous for the following story. He says, one day, there was a princess, who came out of the merchas, she came out of the bathhouse. And a man, there was a guy from Yoshvei Kronos who saw her. A simple guy hanging out in the street, sees the beautiful princess, and he gave a big sigh. And he said, if only she could be mine. Allah says, I could do with her as I desire. So the princess responds to him and said, it's going to happen in the cemetery. We'll be together in the cemetery, not here. That he was a simple guy, he thought she meant literally. So when he heard these words, he was happy, because he thought she was telling him, go to the cemetery and wait there for her, she'll come, and then he can do as he pleases. Now she obviously didn't mean that. She meant to say that while I'm alive, I'm royal blood, you're a simple villager. There's no shaykhs between us. After 120, we'll all meet together in the cemetery. But not now, because how could a princess, lo yitochen, she could to marry a villager? So he didn't get it though. He thought literally go to the cemetery. So Ishahu got up and he went to the cemetery and he sat there. Vayiksher machshev sichloi ba, and he focuses his mind on this princess. V'tamid, constantly. His yachshav. His mind is thinking about her image, what she looks like. And from his tremendous cheshek, his lust for her, and his desire, hifshites machshavto mikol murgish, he removed his thought from all other senses around him. Nothing existed except for that woman. V'som oisar kula, he placed his entire brain power, his entire mind, b'tzuras ha'isha ahi, the woman's figure and her beauty, day and night, Tamid Yeshiv Bebeis HaKvaris, and he never left because he was waiting for her to come. He eats, he drinks, he sleeps in the cemetery. Every day he said, she doesn't come today, tomorrow she's coming. Many, many days passes. What happened to this guy? Miroiv Prishusa, because he separated himself from everything this world has, except for the image of that princess. But all of the pleasures and all of the existences of this world were a non-mitzias for him. He was pirish of all murgish, from all senses. He had detached himself from all of his senses just to focus on that machshava, b'dover echad tamid. And he was mizbeided, he was in solitude in that cemetery, right? It was just him and that tremendous cheshik. So his nefesh, nispashta, was, it unenclosed itself from all the senses around it. And the nefesh shovel hidavik b'muskalos. His mind, like almost kind of detached from his body. Like he no longer felt his physical existence, no longer was aware of the physical reality around him. The mind became just, it was just the intellect, just intellectual ideas. And then at some point he even stopped thinking about the woman, because once the mind was no longer aware of his physical metzias and the physical surroundings, right? So just like his body was no longer on the radar, so was her body. He no longer thought about her beauty and the figure of her body. Instead, he began to cleave to spirituality. His mind began thinking about God. Until a few more days passed, all he had was a muskul halikid filling up his entire metzias. And he turned into a complete servant of God. Until any time he davened, he was answered. And every bracha he gave to anyone that passed by, all these people were passing by the cemetery. Asher ya'avru, anyone that passed by asking for a bracha, any bracha he gave was fulfilled. Seichrim, there were soldiers and there were businessmen. Anyone that passed through that cemetery would turn to him and receive a bracha until until his the name went far. Ad kan l'shoyna le'inyanenu. So says that's the story of Yitzchak de Minaku. So the Reishis Chochma va'oid herich sham b'mailas ha'porush hazen, how great this porush became. And Rav Yitzchak de Minaku writes that from the stories of these prushim, he says that someone that does not have a desire for a woman is a donkey. That's right. He's doim al-chamor. You don't know what connection means, or a passion or a craving for connection. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Tshuva that when he speaks about a person's passion to cleave to Hashem, he writes like an avos isha, like someone. And he says, not just you're like a donkey, you're worse. Pachas mimeno. You haven't even entered the arena of avodas Hashem. And the reason is mahamurgish, because from the physical sensation of that type of love, you can understand what it means to serve the Eibishter. Until you experience the physical manifestation of it, the physical example of it, you don't even know what's expected of you in the service of Hashem. This is the famous story, as Zalman Schachter refers to it, the saint in the cemetery. So this is just interesting, because the Ibn Ezra quotes the exact same mashal of this princess, that a person would never desire such a thing, because completely out of your realm. And here you have a whole story about someone who dafka completely fell for the princess. So you know what the answer is? It's pashut. The Ibn Ezra says, I'm talking about a person who has das nechayna. This guy was a simple guy. He didn't even get the hint when she told him we'll meet in the cemetery. He thought literally. A simple person, taka, fantasizes to be a superhero flying in the skies. That's the difference of the Ibn Ezra and the Reishis Chochma. But Al Koponim, this is the Ibn Ezra's answer to how you could protect yourself from chemda. The Sefarno gives the same answer. If you look in the Sefer HaIkrim in number 6, Rabbi Yosef Elboy, the Sefer HaIkrim, he was one of the last of the Rishonim, passes away in the 1440s. He was a Talmud of Reb Chistoi Kreskas, who was a student of the Ran. So you're talking about Mamish, if his Rishon is the last Rishon. But he was a great philosopher, and in his Sefer HaIkrim, the purpose is he argues on the Rambam. The Rambam says it's 13 Ikrim, he believes it's only 3. And he has some important things about Daseres HaDibros. One of the things he writes is the order of the last couple Dibros. It begins with not to murder, and then Lo Yisirtzach. What's after Lo Yisirtzach? Loy sinif. Why is that after? So he says, look what he says. Hadover shukumamutza, because a person's wife is in between his body versus his possessions. Loy shirtzach is the guy's body. Loy sinif is don't take what's almost his body, because ishtay kagufay, it's his wife. Because a woman, on the one hand, it's like it's the body himself. We have halacha, ishta, a person's wife is like his body. On the other hand, the woman's also like a person's acquisition. So that's why loy sinif comes after. And then we lower it to what? Right, then you have loy signav, which let's say it means gnevus mammon. And then you have loy sanav re'acha eit shaker, that it's not enough that you don't hurt your friend begufay, b'manu, b'ishtay, but even not to be mazikim in speech. Loy sanav re'acha eit shaker is in speech. V'gam loy b'machshava, not even in thought. And that's loy sachmod eishes re'acha. He says loy sachmod is in thought. It sounds from the Ikrim as well that you can be over loy sachmod just in your mind. Like the Sefarno learns, like the Ibn Ezra learns. So the Pashtonim, in other words, we're going to see, like I mentioned, in halacha, actually it's only if you get your hands on the item. But there's definitely room to touch the pasuk. It means chemda, even in your heart. Jump to the next page for a second. Absolutely fascinating. It's the top of the next page, number 10, the top right. This is from the Semak, Reb Yitzchak of Kurvil, who's one of the Baalei Tosfos in the mid-1200s. He says, the Aseres Hadibros end with Loy Sachmod, number 10. Loy Merlecha, Sha'achoymed Oiver Bekulan. If somebody covets, you'll end up violating all 10. The Gam, look what he says here. He quotes a few fascinating things. Oy loy lechoymed, woe to someone who lusts, that's for the Isha, or someone who covets and desires somebody else's possessions. Because your entire life, it's painful. You're never happy. Whereas someone who's happy with what he has a happy life forever. But if you're envious, it's painful your entire life. And he gives a mashal. He says there was an oirev, there was a raven, who said, I'm going to steal from every bird another feather, and they'll look beautiful. So the oirev went to all these different birds and stole feathers, different colors, different shades, and he puts it on him, and he looks beautiful because he's covered in all these different feathers. L'soif, in the end, the other birds recognize, each one says, that's my feather, that's my feather. And each one came and plucked off their feather. Each one took their feather, v'nishur, and he remained mechui, and then he looked awful because he had nothing. He had nothing. And that almost sounds like the Gemara in Saita that says, right, if your eyes dwell on something which isn't yours, what you covet won't become yours, and what you have, you'll lose. You'll end up with absolutely nothing. He says another mashal. Look at this story. This is a great story. There was a choymed, there was a kanoi, two people, right? Two guys enter the bar. There's a choymed, the guy who covets, and the kanoi, there's the zealot. A malach bumps into them. Va'amar, and he said, Echad mikem yishal darvim, one of you can ask something from me, and I'll give it to you, but your friend gets double. So one of these guys is the choymed, the other is the kanoi. What's the difference? The kanoi doesn't want to be the one to ask, because how could my friend get double? He's going to get double? I'll be jealous, that can't be. And the choymed didn't want to be the one to ask first, because he wanted the double. The choymed doesn't really, the choymed he wants a double for himself. So the kanoi loy ratzo lishol tchiluk, he didn't want to get first, because then he'd be jealous that the friend gets double. And the choymed, he glatt wanted the double. So the choymed he urged the kanoi, the jealous guy. He said, you ask first, you be shoyl first. So you know what the kanoi said? He told the malach, blind me in one eye. Shoyl, he said, blind me in one eye, and then his friend would blind it in two eyes. You understand what the kanoi? The kanoi doesn't even want something, what's negaya him is what my friend has. I don't mind if I lose an eye, he loses two eyes. If I get money, he'll get double. I would rather lose an eye and that person not get more money than me. That's the illness of a kanoi. Gam Moshli says another moshel. This world is, this you may have heard of. This world is similar to a beautiful paradise. There was a fat dog that wanted to enter into the orchard to eat from the beautiful fruits. The problem is he couldn't fit in. Because there was only one small hole. The dog was too fat, was oversized, couldn't fit in. So the dog fasted for 3 days in order it could enter into the hole. And then it entered into the hole and it ate all the fruits. And now the dog is big again. Now can't get out, doesn't want to get out. Doesn't want to get out, it's very happy in the paradise, right? But then the dog hears that the owner of the paradise is coming. Shabala paradise is coming, B'Kadav's man is coming soon. So the dog said, I better get out, or else the guy's going to kill me. The Bala paradise will come and kill me for stealing his fruits. So he needed to fast for another 3 days until it lost its weight in order to leave. When it left, it looks at the paradise and it says, orchard, orchard, right? Elon, Elon, Kama noim perisecha, how beautiful are your fruits. But just like we enter into the orchard, that's how we leave the orchard. Orum nichnasti va'orum moshuv. I went in naked. Right, I had to lose weight in order to go in. I had to become thin to get in. I had to become thin to leave. These are Mishalom the Semak gives when he speaks about Loy Sachmod. So the root of Loy Sachmod is definitely in the heart. But you see from the Ibn Ezra, the Sepharner and the Ikrim, that the whole thing is in the heart. The whole thing is in Machshava. In halacha, we say we have to act on it, and we'll get there in just a moment. Look at number 8, just by the way, clay yoker in Parshas Shmini, a beautiful clay yoker. In Parshas Shmini, the Yidden, so Aaron brings karbonis. Yidden have karbonis. Yidden's karbonis. There's an egel, there's a calf, and there's a goat. So the Teres Kainim, the Sifra says that the purpose of these karbonos was to be mechaper for Averes. The goat was to atone for the goat that was used to fool Yaakov in the sale of Yosef. And the egel, of course, was to atone for the golden calf. The Klei Yoker wants to know the connection of these things. V'akorev elai, it seems to me, he says in number 8, that Baal Medrash Soiver, Shahaba Hatalya, that the egel Azov is dependent on the brothers selling Yosef. And it's very simple. Because why did the brothers shech that goat and fool Yaakov? It was out of kinah. Yan midas hakinah, the envy that the brothers of Yosef had, as the pasuk says, veikanu bayechov, they were envious. That caused the mice of selling him and covering it up, concealing it with shechting the goat. And look what he says, may Oz, from that moment that the brothers acted on their envy and their kinah, and they were probably choymed, they coveted that coat that Yosef had. May Oz nishtarsha b'soicha midas hakina. The midas of kina took root inside their hearts, l'doyers for generations. Like it says until there's the kina's beischa, the kina stays in the house for generations. This is the kina of Beis Yisrael. The Jews have it, which is found by the Yidden more than all other goyim. Says the Klei Yoker, there's no nation more envious than the Yidden. And it all began because the brothers acted on their envy and sold Yosef. That caused the kinah to take such root. Until this egel came out. And that was also kinah. They were envious of Moshe, like Koirach and Adasa. He wants to blame them for the egel. Or at least people like them. It was envy. Fascinating, he says, right? Kinah exists by Yidden more than any other nation. It all came because of the sale of Yosef, and he wants to tie it into the Egel Azov. The Egel Azov has kinah, yet they were envious of Moshe, so they wanted to replace him. So it sounds like we're kind of doomed with this chemda. Not so fast. Look at number 9. Reb Tzadok Hakohen, the famous Chassidic Rebbe Tzadok Hakohen, in his Sefer Tzidkas HaTzadik. Tzidkas HaTzadik, one of the great Sfarim of Reb Tzadok Hakohen, who was a huge Gaon, and in Lublin. And he was there together with the Torah's Chesed, who was a Lubavitcher, and they were both Groise Gaonim. fact, the Rogatchover traveled to Lublin and he spoke to both of them in learning. In fact, he was so taken by the Torah's chesed. They say that's what influenced the Rogatchover to remain a chassid throughout his life. Right, he was a chassid. Of which particular Rebbe, who knows? But his hanhagah, he had chassidish minhagim, the halachas. He grew up. His father was a chassid at Semak, and then they became koppes to chassidim. Until one time he was by the Mogin Ovis by a mimer, and something that was said was neged the Yerushalmi. So that's it. I'm done over here. And he left. He referred to the Frierdiker Rebbe, by the way, as the Nossi. The Rogatchover referred to the Frierdiker Rebbe as the Nossi. But he definitely, just because his father was a chassid, doesn't mean he needed to be a chassid. Right? When the Kotzker became a chassid by the Choiz of Lublin, when he was young, so his father told him, what happened, al titish teres imecha, what about following your tradition? So he told him, it says in last week's parsha, Ze keli va'anvehu, elekei avi v'adoi memenu. First, God has become mine, then I'll deal with elekei avi. First you deal with Ze keli, and I'm choosing the Chassidish life, and then you go back to elekei avi. First, it has to be the way it talks to you. So the Rogatchover didn't have to be a chassid because his father was. But they say that when he saw the ga'inus of the Torah's chesed, it was mashpi on him to choose the life of Chassidus, Chabad Chassidus. That punkt the Torah's chesed sided with when the Tzemach passed away. There was a big shiloh, which of the sons should get the city of Lubavitch. There's a famous din Torah. The Torah's chesed was one of the Rabbanim, and he paskened that the Reb Marash, although he was the youngest, should get the city of Lubavitch, and the other brothers, if they want to be Rebbes, they have to branch out somewhere else. And the Torah's chesed at that point lived in Polotsk. In Polotsk, there were many koppes to Chassidim, who were Chassidim of the Reb Marash's older brother, the Mariel, and they were so upset with him, it was probably dangerous for him to remain there. And he had to flee, so he fled to Lublin. Anyhow, so it could be that, I don't know, the Rogatchover calling the Frierdiker Rebbe the Nossi kind of means that he left Koppes and embraced Lubavitch. I mean, within Chabad, embraced Lubavitch. It could be that why Bechlal did he remain as a chassid? Because of the Torah's chesed. And the Torah's chesed sided with the Lubavitch branch, the Reb Marash's branch. Maybe that's why the Rogatchover later referred to the Frierdiker Rebbe as the Nossi. This is all Beich's verse. I have no idea what I'm talking about. But look at number 9. Who knows? Could be. Look at number 9. Says also, while the Rogatchover was in Lublin, he also met with Reb Tzadok. Famous story. He met with Reb Tzadok, and he began, shissing marmakoimis or shilas. He wanted to get into a pilpul with Reb Tzadok, and Reb Tzadok didn't answer. He just said, when I was young, I did the same thing. I traveled to all the Gedolim and showed them I knew how to learn. But he told him that, but he says, so you'll show your goinus. This is not what life is about. You have to have a Rebbe to be Madrich you and Avodas Hashem. That's what he told him. Which, by the way, which brings to mind another story. The Rogatchover once met up with the Sfas Emes. And the Sfas Emes asked the Rogatchover, "What's learned here? What do you learn?" The Rogatchover said, "Amongst things, I learned Tur." So the Sfas Emes asked, "Do you learn Beis Yosef?" So the Rogatchover said, "I learned Tur." So the Sfas Emes said, "But the Beis Yosef brings all the sources for the Tur." So the Rogatchover says, I figure the sources out on my own." So the Sfas Emes, on the spot, he asked the Rogatchover in 10 different comments of the Tur. 9 out of 10, the Rogatchover said the same thing the Beis Yosef said. But on one of them, he gave a different marker. So the Sfas Emes says, you know that the Beis Yosef gives a different source. So Rogatchover says, no, my source is good. And they had a big back and forth until the Rogatchover proved that his marker was ironclad. And the Sfas Emes held on to the Rogatchover's hand and he said, Yasher. His name was Yosef. They call him Yasher. Yasher. Aber was hat der Eibishter davon? What does God get from all of this intellect? So I understand it to mean he was rebuking him and saying that all of this brilliance, you're not serving God, you're serving yourself. You enjoy it, it's your passion. What are you giving to the Eibishter? This is all for you. I think it's the same sentiment Reb Tzadok Hakohen years earlier had told the Rogachev the same thing. You're coming to show your Gainus. That's not what serving God's about. That's serving yourself. You need a Rebbe to be madrich you in how to serve God. I also think that the Rogachev wasn't nispal, not from what either of them said. Because the Rogachev felt that his learning was not for personal pleasure, even though I'm sure he enjoyed it. The Rogachev felt his learning was his Avodas Hashem. Fine. Says Reb Tzadok Hakohen in number 9. If someone has a powerful desire, the taivas haguf, for physical taivas, al yisatzev was that. Don't be depressed. Somebody can have, the Gemara says, nobody knows what's, you don't know what's going in someone else's heart. And each one thinks to have the biggest nefesh Bahamas. Right? Like Rabbi Shachad in California, the Rosh, he writes to the Rebbe, in a famous letter he wrote when he was a young bocher, quite young, very young, that why do I have a bigger yetzer hara than anybody else? And the Rebbe told him, first of all, that's what everybody thinks. You feel that way, the guy next to you feels that way, and the guy next to him feels that way. And the guy across the room thinks all of them don't know what they're talking about, right? No one knows what somebody else is feeling. But then the Rebbe writes to him, even if it's true that you do have a bigger yetzer hara, the Gemara says in Sukkah, whoever is greater than his friend has a bigger yetzer hara. In other words, maybe you do have bigger taivas, but then you have more capabilities, you have more strength within yourself to overcome. So says Reb Tzadok, though, you have someone who feels they have a huge shukah gedolim on the taivas haguf, which could be food, it could be clothes, it could be taivas noshim, it could be anything. Especially if it's taivas noshim, you can go nuts and depressed. He says, Al yisatzev bazer. Okay, my voice is going to go very soon, so let's go quick. He said, don't be depressed to think kama pogumhu, that I'm stained because I have all of these negative desires. I'm tainted. Like God went wrong with me. Like, well, what happened over here? He says, Adraba fakert. The more of a tshuka you have to taivas noshim, the more of a shaychus you have to love God. The more you are in the arena of serving God. Ki adraba, just like the Reishis Chochma said, adraba, you're a kli muchen, you're the person who can feel a tremendous love for God. Someone who has no taivas noshim could be a very cold person. Such a person, how do they cleave to Hashem? They have no passion. If someone doesn't have the passion for Gasha, if their nefesh Bahamas has no passion, so where's going to be their passion towards God? He says, just like the famous story in Masechta Sukkah, right? So Abaya saw a man and a woman walk together in the forest, and he observed them from afar. He wanted to be shomer, to watch them, make sure they wouldn't. And they just walked and talked and they spoke. And at some point, he made a right turn, she made a left turn. That was it. And Abaya came back and he told somebody, who he says was Elio, that I know, had that been me, I would have succumbed. And this guy, a simple guy, was able to control himself, and I wouldn't have been able to control myself. So Abaya was told, the greater somebody is, the greater the neshama is, the greater the yetzer hara. So this is what Reb Tzadok said, if somebody has a tremendous chemda in his heart, don't give up. It's not a reason to be depressed. Fakert, that means you have passion in your heart. You just have to be able to direct it in the right direction. But you're the one that's able to have a passion to cleave to the Eibishter. Fine. Okay. Join me on the next page. Until now was all, okay, the discussion, the philosophy behind it. Practically, what is the prohibition of loy Sachmod? So there's a very important Rambam in number 11. Sorry, the number 11 is the middle of the page. You go to a couple halachas from Rambam. Says the Rambam, whoever covets the servant or the maidservant or the bias or the kalim of your friend, or anything that you're able to purchase from him, v'hichbid olav bereim, and you pressure him, you send delegations to pressure him, v'hiftaba, you nudge him until you purchase it from him, afapi, even though you paid him, and you didn't just pay him, domim rabim, you paid him extra. You're over the loy sasav, loy sachmod. So says the Rambam, when are you over loy sachmod? Only if you take the item from him. Only if you take the item from him. Right? That's true. But on the other hand, even if you paid, you're still over. But then he says, Ein loikin al lavze, you don't get malchus. Because Ein by Maisa, there's no action. Which is one of the most difficult Rambams. Because the Rambam holds you're only over the lav if you do an action of taking the item. And then he says, but you don't get whipped because it's a lav she'ein by Maisa. And then he says, Ve'eina, you don't violate the lav until you take the Chofetz Chaim. In the same line, the Rambam seems to contradict himself. He says, you don't violate the lav unless you actually take the item. It's not enough to be chaymed in your heart. You have to act on it. But there's no malchus because there's no Maisa. And he says, what's the ra? You have to act on it. As it says, Lo Sachmod, this is what the Mechilta says, we learn out from Avodah Zarah, you shouldn't be chaymed the kesef and zav on top of the getchkes, and you'll take them for you. The pasuk says, Lo Sachmod and v'lakachta, to teach you that chimud is only real chimud if it leads to taking. Chimud sheyesh by Maisa. So the Ra'avad attacks the Rambam on two accounts over here. Look at the Ra'avad on the left in number 12. Amar Avram, I never saw something more of a tamer than this. The Rambam says it's a lav she'ein by Maisa. Where is there a greater Maisa than taking the chayfetz from your friend? There's your Maisa. What the Rambam should have said is, you know why you don't get malchus? Because it's chayiv b'tashlum and you're chayiv to return it. Because you're like a thief who's chayiv lahoshev v'sagzela. But just like when a thief steals something, there's an isur loy sigzel. But the Torah says v'heishev v'sagzela shegazel. You have to return it, and since you're able to return it, you don't get malchus because you could fix the loy sasa. The Rambam writes in the beginning of Hilchos Geneva and Gzela, right? If you're going, if you're over loy signovel, if you're gozel, you're over loy sigzel. Both of them don't carry malchus because you're able to fix them. Now, by one place, the Rambam writes mipnei shenitin l'tashlumin, and the other one nitik la'aseh, right? And the Rogatchover said it's not the same thing, but let's leave that. So, but says the Ra'avad, the halach is if you steal, since it's a mitzvah aseh, returning the gzela. Whether it's the regular lav, which is fixed by an aseh, or it's different, it's a lav shenitin l'tashlum, and it's a different word. But either way, it neutralizes the lav, and you don't receive malchus. So too here says the Ra'avad. If you're chaymed the thing, you actually have to return it. The Ra'avad paskins, if you covet someone's item, and you nudge him until he gives it to you, you bought it from him. You have to return it. Since you have to return it, that's actually your way to escape the malchus, because you can rectify the loisas you violated. The gamze chayiv, you're chayiv to return the chayfetz l'ba'olav. Now the Rambam doesn't say you're chayiv to return the chayfetz to the ba'alim. He doesn't say that. That seems to be one debate. Another debate is the Rambam clearly said it's a lav she'ein by Maisa. So you'll have to explain what the Rambam means is that the isur of chemd is in your heart, but in every mitzvah has a sheer, an amount. What's the amount of chemda you need to violate? If it reaches the boiling point that you actually acted upon it, then that's the siman you've had enough chemda to violate the loisasa. But there's no ma'aseh in the loisasa. The ma'aseh is just a siman that you've reached the boiling point. That's what it is. But there's another debate between the Rambam and the Ra'avad. Look on the other Ra'avad, the one line. The Ra'avad says, "V'loy omar reitza'ani." The Ra'avad says you only violate loy sachmod even if you paid, if the guy didn't say, fine, I want. The Ra'avad holds if the guy says, okay, I want, then actually, yes, I want to sell, then actually, according to the Ra'avad, you're not over. The Rambam doesn't say, according to the Rambam, it's mashmi, you're over regardless. There is a similar debate between the Rambam and the Ra'avad in Hilchos Ishus. If a group of hoodlums, Yidden or Goyim, it doesn't matter, force Yankel to be Mekadosh Bela, and his harem, with a gun, there's a gun pointed to his head. There's one gun on his head, and one gun on his heart, and one gun on his neck, and he's a dead man. There's no way. She says he's Mekadosher, The Kiddushin are Kiddushin. Because since his life was at stake, he actually wanted to go ahead with the act to save his life, right? He not interested in her at all, and he would have done it otherwise. But because he wants to save his life, so he is willing to go along with the coercion. And the Kiddushin is effective. The Ra'avad there says only if the guy actually said, Reitzani, I want. If the guy didn't say the words, it isn't good. And the Rambam's not Machalak, it's interesting. By Gerushin, though, if somebody halachically has to divorce his wife but refuses, but then is coerced, right, until he divorces, the Gerushin is good. But there the Rambam says he has to say Reitzani. What's interesting is the source sugya, one of the sources is in Baba Basra. The sugya of Tluya V'Zovin. You have a nice field, and I want to buy it from you. But I don't want to take it. I'm not a thief. I'm going to give you the money. You don't want to sell it. So I take out a gun and I say, are you sure you don't want to reconsider? So you just go ahead with it. You get the money, right? So you take the money and you accept the sale because that's your ticket to survival. You don't want to die. So there as well, the Rambam does not say you have to say Reitzani. So it's interesting going through all the sugyas, when yeah, when not. But over here you have this debate. So there's almost like three debates over here. There's one debate, you have to give back the item. There's a debate, is this called the lav sheyesh by ma'isa or not? And there's a debate, what if the guy says Reitzani? The Magid Mishnah believes all of this is Tolui Zeh B'Zeh. The Magid Mishnah on the Rambam writes, it's all Tolui Zeh B'Zeh. He says, according to the Ra'avad, if the guy says he wants, right, then you're not over loy Sachmod. Right? That's what the Ra'avad says clearly. If the guy says, okay, I want, you nudge him and you give him the money, the guy says, all right, let's go for it. If you get him to say, I want, you're not over. So then the sale is taka binding. Because the guy said, I want. You don't have to give back the item. The guy said, I want, you're not over loy Sachmod and gegangen. But if the guy says, I don't want, right? So then that's why the Ra'avad said it's like a theft. If the guy didn't say that he wants, which basically means he doesn't want, even though you're giving the money, it's like a theft. And if it's like theft, then you really have to give the item back. But since you're able to give the item back, that's your ticket not to get malchus for the loy Sachmod. But the Rambam holds even by Reitzani, even if it says I want, you're still over on loy Sachmod. But if he says he wants, then the sale's good, I don't have to give it back. So it's not nitin l'tashlumin. So why don't I get malchus? So the Rambam needed the reason that it doesn't have a ma'isa. All right, either way, it happens to be that besides the debates of the Rambam and the Ra'avad, there's a major debate between the Rambam and Ra'avad versus Tosfos. What's that? The Gemara in Bab Metzia Daf Hey Amud Beis is talking about if somebody is suspected of stealing, is there a purpose to ask him to swear? Or if he's suspected to be a liar, and he'll swear falsely too, like what are you going to gain? Do I say chashud on mammon? If you're suspected on money, you're chashud on a shvur, you'll swear falsely too. So the Gemara says, yeah, the Gemara says, no, it can't be. Because a shomer, right, even if a shomer wants to, sometimes a shomer, even if he wants to pay for the item that he was watching, right, we make him swear that he doesn't have it hiding in his house. So the shvur she'ena b'shus yeshvur, that I don't have it. So the Gemara says, but if you're suspecting the guy is stealing, right? So then what's the point of having him swear? So the Gemara says, no, this guy doesn't think he's a thief because he's paying the money. He doesn't think he's a thief. He's not really suspected on a minor. So frek the Gemara, but he's over in loy Sachmod. He's over a loy sas of loy Sachmod. So he's suspected of coveting somebody else's money. So the Gemara says, since he's paying, he doesn't think he's being over loy Sachmod. That's what the Gemara says. It sounds from the Gemara that he thinks that since he's paying, he's not over. But in truth, he's wrong. That's how the Rambam and the Ra'avad understand the Gemara. Tosfos, in two places, says no. It could be that's what the guy thinks, and that's what the truth is. That if you pay, you're taka not over loy sachmod. You're only over loy sachmod if you don't pay. I tell you that if you don't pay, you're stama gazlan. Yeah, you're over 2 lavin. Loy sigzel and loy sachmod. Or the way the Semak explains in Siman Lamed Daled and Shulchan Aruch, he explains beautiful. Stealing from someone is loy sigzel. But what if I nudge you and make you crazy until you give it to me? I didn't steal it, you let me take it, but I didn't pay. That's loy sachmod. But if I pay, says the Semak, according to these answers of Tosfos, taka, there's no loy sachmod. So Tosfos has a shitta, and it's also the Samag, the great Smag, Rab Moshe Mikutzi, one of the great Rishonim in Kutzis in France. It's in the early 1200s. The great Smag, he paskins the same way. That when the Gemara says people think that if you pay, you don't violate loy sachmod, it's taka the truth. Loy sachmod is only if you don't pay. You're stealing, so I'd like Tosfos says, yeah, you violate 2 lavin. Or the Semak who says, no, stealing, you take it without the guy's knowledge or against his will. The loy sachmod is you convince him until he gives it to you. But if you actually pay, there's no loy sachmod. The Rambam, the Ra'avad, and the Yereim all hold no. The Gemara, that's what people think, but that's not the truth. In the truth, you're over loy sachmod even if you pay. So at this point where we're holding it, you have quite a few different shittas over here. You have the Ikrim and the Ezra and the Sforno who seem to say you're over loy sachmod even in your heart. You have all the poskim who believe you're not over until you act upon it and you actually take the item. But within that, you have many debates. Tosfos brings a shitta, and it's the Smag shitta, that if you pay, even though you nudged the guy, you made him a sugar till he sold it to you, but you gave him money in place of it, you're not over loy sachmod. You're not over. The Rambam, the Ra'avad, and the Yereim hold, even if you pay, you're over. But the Ra'avad said if the guy says roitzani, you're not over. The Rambam holds you're even over if you pay and the guy says roitzani. Okay? That's a little build-up. Hold on. We're not done. The Rambam continues, and this is where things take a turn. Go back to number 11, Halacha Yud. He says, Kol hamis'ave. If somebody desires your friend's house or his wife or kalim, the chol kayotz mishar dvarim, they're able to buy. He says, once you think in your heart, how can I acquire this? The nifta liboy, and your heart was seduced bedover. In other words, you in your mind, you are cunningly calculating how you can get hold of that person's item, even if you're planning to buy it from him. Right? I'm planning to pay. At that moment, you're over on a loy sas of loy sisave in Parshas Ves Chanon, because ein taiva ela belev bilvad. There's a difference of chemda versus taiva. Chemda is when the desire of the heart overflows into an action. Taiva ein taiva ela belev bilvad. But the Rambam says the taiva has to be not only you want the item, but you plan in your mind how to get your hands on it. Fascinating. So that's the Rambam said. The Rambam learns loy sisave, number 2, is different than loy sachmod. It's a poshut, a different lav. Loy sisave is in the heart. But there's a caveat. You don't violate loy sisave unless you think in your heart how you could be over loy sachmod, how you could actually get your hands on it, right? Even though you plan on paying it. But according to the Ra'avad, if in your heart you're planning to buy from him in a way that he'll say roitzani, l'chera you won't be over loy sisave. L'chera you'd say, there are those that say that. Makes sense, right? So upon him. So go back to the page before, by the way, the Chizkuni in number 5. I have a Chizkuni from Parshas Ves Chanon on the words v'loy sisave. He says, ein taiva ela belev. Taiva is only in the heart. Im gomar beliboy, if you decide in your heart, al yedei tachanunim, that if you decide in your heart that I'm going to beseech from the person, I will make him nuts, or I'm going to call so-and-so and so-and-so to represent me, or in your heart you decide that you will intimidate the owner of the item to sell him your chayfetz, you're immediately over loisis haver. That's just like the Rambam. That you plan, you goimer in your heart exactly how you get your hands on it. And you already know who you're going to call, how you're going to intimidate him. The Chizkuni says, once you bring the chemd into your mouth, you violate loy Sachmod. It's a very strange Chizkuni. No one knows where this comes from. What does he even mean? When he says befiv, does he mean that you say, oh, I want to get... Does he mean when you actually go to, can you please nudge him on my behalf? Or does the dibur mean when you actually go and nudge the moicher himself for the item? Like what dibur does he refer to? And where does he get that dibur? The Ibn Ezra, the Sefarno, the Ikrim said machshava. The Paiskim all said maisa. Comes the Chizkuni and says dibur. Who dibur? What dibur? Where does this come from? So, one?
Middle ground.
Right. So look at number 16 on the next page, the Semak. We'll see a couple of things, then we'll finish up. The Semak says Shaloi Lachmoid in number 16. This is the Semak. Don't mix up between the Samag and the Semak.
Who's this?
The Semak is Reb Yitzchak of Courville. He's a generation younger than the Semak. Reb Moshe of, they're both in France. They're both from the Baalei Toisus Yeshivas, and they both wrote a Sefer HaMitzvahs, but one's much bigger than the other one. So the bigger one is the Sefer Mitzvahs Gadol. This is the Sefer Mitzvahs Katan, the Semak, or the Rebbe would say the Samak, I don't know exactly. Anyhow, so in number 16 says the Semak, Shaloi Lachmod, you can't covet, and it says Lo Sachmod. It says in the Mechilta that Yochel, you might think bedvarim that even words is enough. Talmud loymar, like the Rambam brought from Avodah Zarah, that velakachto lecha. The chimud needs to result in a taking. Just like there it's a ma'isa, so to here is a ma'isa. Mikol mokum, but says the Semak, it seems to me that even though the Mechilta says you're not over unless it's accompanied with an action, but even in your heart you're still osir. But it's not finished to be chayiv until you do a ma'isa. A very strange Semak, as if the shear of the Aveira is that you actually get it. In your heart is like chatzi shear, it's like chatzi shear. That's what he's saying, it's also, it's mashma, also deraisa, but it's not nigmar until you do the maisa. The Ramban and the Rambam have a famous debate. A woman that carries chorus to you, right? So the chorus is only for the actual beer. What about chibuk, hugging, and these types of things, all the preliminary acts. Thank you. So the Rambam holds they're all also doiraisa. The pasuk says in Achremus, loy sikruvu legalis, can't come close to megal and erva. And the Ramban disagrees and says all of the earlier acts are just rabbinic. But the Ramban writes as Savari, it could be that chibuk, hugging, and these types of things is chatzi shir, it's half the amount of intimacy. The Maram Shik writes, abortion is chatzi shir of murder. Interesting cases of chatzi shir. I think that's what the Semak is saying, something like that over here. It's also deraisa to have the machshot, to have the feeling. It's only nigmer by the ma'aser. In other words, when you have the ma'aser, you have the gemar. Then you have the full shir. Like the Rambam would say that once you have the ma'aser, that represents you have the full throttle in the heart. But if you didn't reach that point, you have less. You have chatzi shir. It's still awesome in our Torah. We pass the chatzi awesome in our Torah. So you have the Semak saying that in the heart is half the amount. The mais is the full amount. The Chizkuni is saying lo Sachmod even bedibur. In other words, there are so many different variations amongst the Rishonim over here. B'chlal, the fact that the Rambam says there's two inyonim, lo Sachmod and lo Sisave. The Semak says, rubbish. Look, he continues in number 16. He says, Ubidiyoiv dom, he says, if you pay money, you're chayiv achas. If you pay the guy, you're not chayiv for stealing, you're chayiv for chemda. If you don't give the guy money, you're chayiv twice. Right? Stealing and chemda. Fine. But then he says, I think that loy sachmod and loy sisav is all one thing. It's just a double expression. There's the whole thing the Rambam writes, and the Sefer HaChinuch follows him. The Semak says it's all barking up the wrong tree. And look at number 13, the Samag says the same thing. He says, "V'lo yitochen lo meken." It can't be the Rambam that we just saw about the tithe is right. Because in Parshas V'eschana it says, look, it says, Loi Sachmod eishis reacha, Loi sisava beis reacha. According to the Rambam, Loi sisava is more of a chumr. You can't even have it in your heart. But it's not said about the woman. It's only said about the house. By the wife, it says chemda. It comes out that there's a chumrah by the house of your friend more than his wife. It can't be. Can't be. Doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that being chomed your friend's wife is more lenient than being chomed his house. Konish zayin. Now the truth is, the Rambam, if you look back in the Rambam, in Halacha Yud, the Rambam actually said, Misava goes on Ishtay as well. The Rambam actually writes that even though in the Asher Sadibris it says, Loi Sachmod the wife, Loi Sisava the bias, Loi Sisava goes on the wife too. So the Rambam already preempted this question. But the Semak says the Chimud and Taiv is all one thing. And he quotes Rashi. If you look in Rashi writes of Eschanon that, quoting from Unklus, that Unklus gives the taich that he gives for Taivas, Leiserig, is the same taich of Chemda. So it's actually all one and the same. The Samag and the Semak believe that the Rambam and the Sefer HaChinuch barking up the wrong tree. Even though the Samag usually follows the Rambam, but here he says it's not true. V'lo yitochen. V'lo yitochen. And like I mentioned, he argues on the other din as well. He holds if you actually pay, he holds like the Shitta said, if you pay, there's no loy Sachmod. So he argues on the Rambam on two accounts over here. Al kol ponim. So, very quickly, a few very interesting debates, more recent debates about loy Sachmod. By the way, hold on, one more. In number 15, the Chinuch writes, by loy sisava, if someone's over al zeh, and is, number 15, and is koveya his machshava to devour somebody else's item, you're over on the lav. The Sefer HaChinuch holds different than the Rambam. He holds loy sisava means even if you just have the desire in your heart. The Rambam and the Chizkuni said the desire needs to be until you figure out ways and paths of how to get your hand on the item. You're over loy sisava at that point. According to the Chinuch, the moment you just focus your thoughts on the item, you're already over. Which would go back to the question we began the shir with, so how could they that's like not my fault. Well, the Chinuch says only if you're koveya machshava, like if you let your thoughts linger for a very long time on it. So I would say he's more machmir than the Rambam. Yeah. But it's still a fleeting, just if you have the passion but you don't harbor the thought, you're not over. You have to koveya machshava, and that's a choice. That's a choice. Look at this, in number 17, fascinating. The Chofetz Chaim in the Sefer Shmiras Haloshen writes, I want to be ma'ir is something that many people are stumbling in. It's known you can't steal from anyone, from others, from your family, even from your parents. Look what he says. He says, there's a lav of loy Sachmod, and it's not only if you covet in your heart, you have to act on it. You need to, like the Rambam describes, you send people to urge and nudge until the guy hands it over to you. So he says like this, what if you're engaged to a woman? You're marrying somebody's daughter, right? So you write the Tanoim with the Shver. And you decided already what each one is going to be bringing into the marriage. What are you bringing in? What's your Shver going to bring in? In brackets, he says, before you decide, you can definitely negotiate with each other because or else you won't go into the agreement. But once the negotiation is settled and the son-in-law wants more money, so he gets a group of people to urge the shver to give more dowry. Says the Chofetz Chaim, you're over loy Sachmod, because you're urging your shver to give, which is it's a pella. There's a sefer called there's a sefer, the sefer on Dinim Ominous. Everybody learns it. The Pischei Choshen. He says over there, there was a custom People used to write Sforim, right? And print them, publish them. Then you have a stack of 500 Sforim and nobody wants to buy. So you know what you do? You mail them to recipients. And then you'll guilt them into sending you back, reimbursement. It was a technique. You send them all to the Rosh Hashanah, you send all 500 out, and then if somebody gets the sefer, they know that they're going to see you later, and you're going to ask them, "Do you get my sefer?" So you get guilted into. So this guy wanted to taina that if you do that, you're over loy Sachmod, because you're coveting that person's money, and you're coercing them into giving it to you. What? Oh, okay. So first of all, the Gabiso, Rabbi Asher Weiss believes very strongly that loy Sachmod has to be on an item, a soda, a shur, a wife, a house. But if you stam envy somebody's guilt and you want to take some of their money, there's no loy Sachmod. Sachmod when you covet a specific item, not generally somebody's money. So therefore, if you to urge a nudge shver to give you a bigger dowry, there's no loy Sachmod. Or if you send these sforim and you coerce people to pay for it, you're coercing them to give it. But it's not like you set your mind on that specific amount. It's not a specific item. It's b'chal that the guy should give you some money. Even if it's a specific amount, it's not a specific item. This is a very strange Chofetz Chaim that he says that Pasha urging your shver to give you dowry is Pashad loy Sachmod. Is Pashad loy Sachmod. It's very strange. L'chayre, there has to be an item, but if you stam covet somebody's, extravagance and you want to get a part of it, but not a specific item, where do you see in the Torah you're over loy Sachmod? You envy the wealth that they have, but then you get only a certain amount, right? So you could always tie in a b'chlal, I didn't take what I wanted. Because I envy, all of their, all the hundreds of millions. I only got my hand on a small amount. I didn't even get what I coveted. It's very hard to say I don't know. I guess by the Sforim, though, there is a certain amount of money. They're the $30 for the sefer. You want that money. But still, it's very hard to say, loy Sachmod. It's a big chiddush, the Chofetz Chaim writes that. The Kuzheglaver Goin, Rav Frumer, right? Reb Tzvi Frumer, who wrote the Eretz Tzvi. So he was a student of the Avnei Nezer in the Avnei Nezer's elder years. After the Avnei Nezer passed away, so his son, the Shei Mishmul, becomes the Rebbe of Sachachov, big Rebbe. And he invites the Kuzheglaver, who was not yet the Kuzheglaver, Reb Tzvi Frumer, to be the Rosh Yeshiva in Sachachov. Later he was in Kuzheglav, and after that he went to Chachmei Lublin, where Meir Shapira passed away. I think it was in 1934, and the Kuzheglaver became the Rosh Yeshiva, and he took the Yeshiva Chachmei Lublin to new levels. It only lasted for 5 years until that was the end of that, and then he was in the Warsaw Ghetto, where he had a yeshiva in the Warsaw Ghetto until the uprising, and then he was murdered by the Nazis. But he had in the last he was taken to one of the concentration camps and killed over there. So he in his Sefer Eretz Tzvi, he quotes a number of debates he had with the Imrei Emes about loy Sachmod. Okay, one of them was, even if you have a certain item that I want, but I could buy it in the store, right? There's a can of Coke over there. I could buy it in the store, but whatever. I'm too lazy to go. I really want that can. And I make you meshuga I give you $2 for the can. I take the can. The Imrei Emes said, you're b'chlal not over. You're not over. Because since the item could be readily bought elsewhere, you're not over. And the Eretz Tzvi tainas, what's the difference if you could buy it elsewhere? I was chaymed that you're the item that you have. I urged you until you relinquished it to me. There's still no, but this item was from Re'echa. This item was from Re'echa. So L'chayr is connected to the thing we said before. See, according to the Chofetz Chaim and the Pischei Choshen, that anytime you covet anything from somebody's loy Sachmod, here too. But if you say you have to covet a specific item, it has to be very specific, it also makes sense to say it has to be specifically his. And that's the argument of the Imrei Emes. It has to be specifically his. Beis re'echa, something that he has, not something that's readily available.
Clearly, a donkey's in a can of Coke is the same thing.
That type of donkey is something special. Hard to die if you could buy it elsewhere. Why are you giving it to him? In fact, the case of the Rambam was that you're paying extra money. You're still over. Why are you paying extra money? If it's readily available, why are you paying extra money? The Rambam said even if you gave Domim Rabim, the extra money seems to indicate there's something unique about that. I can't get it elsewhere. I want him not to have it? No, there's something about that which I can't get elsewhere. But if there's no difference of that and something elsewhere, the Imrei Emes says, you're not over. The Eretz Tzvi disagrees. The Eretz Tzvi says he doesn't see a difference. Why should it make a difference available? I got Shur the Chamer, or even base.
When you have a unique cow.
And Isha, a woman's 1 in a million, but there's more than 1 in a million women, right? Something else. So the same way the woman is different than all other women, why can't the Shur and Chamer be different than all other Shvarim and Chamer? Why? It can't be like that. Animals are all the same. Think of a difference. Is there objectively a difference? So that was one debate. That's interesting debate. I don't know. Otherwise, I hear the Eretz Tzvi's Tana, but I also hear, as once you say that it has to be a specific item, maybe it has to be specifically his. There was another debate they had. That what if you nudge someone until they give it to you as a gift? None of the transaction. You nudge them and they give it to you as a gift. So again, the Eretz Tzvi was machmer. He says, what's the difference if you... Kal v'chomer. If you pay the guy for it, you're for sure. If you don't pay for it. Yeah, but not paying for it's not talking about a case of theft. Remember the Semak that I quoted. Talking about you urge him, you nudge him until he say, all right, I give it to you. Right? Let's say he says, Roid Sa'ani, which according to the Rambam, you're over anyhow. So Roid Sa'ani, okay, you know what, I'll give it to you as a gift. Almost the fact that he's giving as a gift is almost like that he's okay with it. Or else why didn't he demand the money? You could say a kal v'chomer, madoch if you pay, you're over for sure if you don't pay. You could say fakert. It's talking about that I'm urging him and nudging him until he gives it to me. If he gives it to me for free, he could have asked for money. Why didn't he ask for the money? Apparently, he says, you know what? Apparently, he's okay with me taking it. If he wasn't, he most definitely would have asked for the money. That's the taina of the Imrei Emes, that you're not over by a gift. So the Eretz Tzvi says, I have a Rabbeinu Yoina. Rabbeinu Yoina writes in Sha'arei Tshuva, that even by a gift, you're over loy sachmod. If you nudge him and give it to you as a gift, it's loy sachmod. And the Imrei Emes says, Rabbeinu Yoina, he says, it's a musar sefer Sha'arei Tshuva. Can't pass him from. And not just that, he says, Rabbeinu Yoina is one Rishon. None of the other Rishonim said that. They all spoke about paying. Why didn't any of them also speak about gift? It must be as a das yochid. The Eretz Tzvi says, you know why the Ram didn't speak about a gift? It's a kal v'chomer. He said, if you paid him a lot of money, for sure if you paid him nothing. Very interesting debate.